Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 7th of February of 2025. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the Sudzha direction, where most likely the armed forces of Ukraine decided to stop any offensive operation and not to attack more the positions of the armed forces of Russian Federation. As you can see, we have a lot of icons from this area, but most of these icons, more precisely maybe 95% of these icons, are from the 6th of February when the Ukrainians were attacking. We can take a look at them once again. We got a lot of videos that Ukrainians were trying to attack the Russian positions. Basically, during the 7th of February, we were clarifying the situation, the events that have been taking place since the 6th of February. And as for the previous 24 hours, as for the 7th of February, the Ukrainians haven't managed to improve their positions. At least we don't have any updates about this. Of course, we have some changes on the ground, and let's take a look at how the map was changing since the beginning of Ukraine offensive. So these things that you can see right now in front of your screens is the situation on the ground before the beginning of the Ukraine offensive operation. By the end of the 6th of February, the armed forces of Ukraine managed to break through the Russians, the first defense belt of the armed forces of Russian Federation. Most likely as a result of offensive operation, the Ukrainians managed to encircle or to cut and cauldron the Russians on the territory of Kursk and Andrea. During the 6th of February, we got reports that Ukrainians managed to reach the outskirts of the settlement of Fansievka, and maybe the Ukrainians managed to enter the settlement of Ulanak. But once again, by the end of the 6th of the February of 2025, we didn't receive anything that can confirm this. And during the night between the 6th and the 7th of February, we got a lot of geolocations, and now we understand more or less what exactly is happening right now, and most likely we understand what exactly the Ukrainians are planning to do in the next 24 hours. So, according to information we have, and according to most important geolocations, the armed forces of Ukraine managed to enter the settlement of Fansievka, and in this video, for example, we can see exactly the process, how exactly the Ukrainians were attacking in the direction of Ruskaya Konopelka, Fansievka itself. And in the second part of the video, more precisely in this part, we can see the movements of the Ukrainian forces on the territory of the village. Based on this video, most of the mappers have adjusted their maps in this area. Now let's discuss the situation about different articles, different posts that were published by other sources. For example, neutral mappers reported that Ukrainians also managed to establish complete control over the tree lines that goes from the north in the southern direction and then in the western direction toward the settlement of Fansievka. And telling the truth, this is more or less very good defense belt that Ukrainians can use, let's say, to repel any possible Russian offensive operation or counter-offensive operation that might take place during the next several days. Furthermore, according to the same neutral mappers, the Ukrainians managed to enter the settlement of Cherkasskaya Konopelka. As for the end of the 7th of February, we still haven't received even a single video that can confirm this. But telling the truth, I believe that there is a video that can confirm this. For example, some pro-Russian resources and pro-Russian mappers adjusted their maps in this area, and the pro-Russian resources reported that indeed the Ukrainians managed to enter the settlement of Cherkasskaya Konopelka and to take under control at least this street that, as you can see, is located, let's say, along the forest. So most likely the Ukrainians from the settlement of Makhnovka managed to cross the forest and to attack the Russian positions and to take the forest under complete control. So, and that's it. And anyway, without any, let's say, geolocations or anything that can confirm this. And the most important thing from all these things and from all these events that have been taking place since the beginning of the 6th of February is that today, on the 7th of February, the Ukrainians didn't start any offensive operation. So we were expecting that Ukrainians will start the second wave of attack. The Ukrainians will try to test the Russian defense belt, most likely in the area of the settlement of Plyokhova, that Ukrainians today will try to improve their positions and to enter the settlement of Ulanak, but nothing happened. And this is very important information because now we more or less understand what exactly the Ukrainians are planning to do. Of course, some people can say that currently the Ukrainians are regrouping, and today we got a lot of reports that Ukrainians were sending more and more vehicles, infantry fighting vehicles, tanks, infantry troops in the Sudzha direction with the purpose to replace losses and to prepare themselves before another wave of attack. But telling the truth, It's already 24 hours left since the first attack. Most likely we need to understand that the Ukrainians is not the only part who is currently regrouping. The Russians are regrouping as well. And most likely, if Ukrainians begin offensive tomorrow, Ukrainians will be completely defeated. Ukrainians will be forced to fall back, and there are very high chances that the Russians will try to counterattack with the purpose to answer the central part of Sudzha. So we believe that Ukrainians are not going to make any offensive operation. So now, from this perspective, more or less, we understand what were the main purposes of Ukraine attack, and the main purposes were from the Ukrainian side. Were to force the Russians to fall back from the area of the city. Because I'll remind you that Sudzha is very important for Zelensky. He has some plans for the town, he has some goals, and he wants to exchange this territory for something else. For example, today we got a very interesting article that was published by the Telegraph. Let's take a look at this article. Let's discuss this article in details. For example, Putin will likely have to return some, if not all, of the captured territory to Ukraine in exchange for Kursk. That was stated by the Telegraph. Thousands of square kilometers of captured Ukrainian land in exchange for hundreds in Kursk is the only option for a deal. That was written by the publication. So, if we summarize everything that was published by the Telegraph, Ukraine will give back the Russians this Sudzha direction, this small island on the territory of Russian Federation, in exchange for everything, for LPR, for DPR, for Zaporizhzhia, for Kherson, and the most important, for Crimea. So, according to the Telegraph, probably the territories that the Russians would return in exchange for Kushna is maybe 1,000 times bigger in comparison with the territories that is under complete control of the armed forces of Ukraine. Obviously, this is something like a wishful thinking, but who knows, maybe Zelensky believes that this is the reality and he will be able to do this. Who knows what exactly is happening in his mind. Anyway, let's continue. So maybe, and we believe that was the main purpose, just to force the Russians to fall back, to create a media victory, to create a buffer zone, and to win another month. Because now, of course, if the Russians will try to restore control over the settlement by the name of Cherkasskaya Konopelka, it will take time. It will take 1 week, 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, maybe 1 month, who knows. But obviously, this time plays in Ukrainian favor, because we are getting closer and closer to the negotiation process and to the end of the conflict. And for example, today, the Western countries leaked the information about the peace plan of Trump peace plan. Very interesting plan, and according to him, Trump aims to have Zelensky agree to a ceasefire by April 20, stopping Russia's advance. Ukraine would be barred from joining NATO under the plan. Kyiv would recognize Russian territorial sovereignty over annexed lands and withdraw troops from Kursk, and European, possible British troops would police it. So very interesting plan, but I believe that Russia will not accept this, and Russia will not accept this not because of British forces along the line of combat contact or anything else. Russia will not accept this plan because this plan doesn't have anything about the most important things for Russia. First of all, Russian language, and the second, Russian church. Because obviously, when talking about this plan, from some perspective, this is a very good plan, telling the truth. This plan will finish the conflict. Russia will take its territories, so Ukraine will take its own. Ukraine will be neutral, no joining of NATO. But the problem is that if Russia signs this plan, they will lose any possibilities to fight for Ukraine when talking about not a hot phase of war along the line of combat contact, but when talking about influence, about diplomatic, let's say, attacks, about some media attacks, and many other things. So if Russia wants to save the influence in Ukraine, they need to have Russian language as a government language as a Ukrainian state. Furthermore, Russia needs to have a Russian church as the main and dominate church on the territory of Ukraine. Furthermore, Ukraine should pay some penalties to Russian church for those sufferings and for those things that Ukraine government deal to Russian church since the beginning of the special military operation. If Russia can save their presence in face of church and in face of language, obviously sooner or later, and most likely, the Russians will be able to restore its influence and its power on the territory of Ukraine. For example, we can discuss the situation in Georgia. This is a very good example because if you remember, in 2008, there was a very short war between Georgia and Russia, and as a result of that war, Georgia lost up to 15 or 20% of its territories. And now we see that Georgia, after, let's say, 20 years after, a bit less, 16 years later, choose Russia as the main allies, but not European countries, despite the war, despite the territorial losses. So something like this might happen in Ukraine. So that's why the Western countries don't want Russian language and Russian church to keep its influence on the territory of Ukraine. So that's why nobody even talks about this. So this is the reason why the Russians are not going to accept this agreement. Now let's continue with Suja. There is one important thing that Ukrainians haven't managed to resolve as a result of offensive operation. And the most important, the Russians still have their drones flying from the settlement of Plyokhova in the direction of Yunakievka. And the Russians still have possibilities to control the main supply roads in this area. And the most important, the Russians still have possibilities to restore control over the territory they lost during Ukraine offensive. Because during Ukraine offensive, the Ukrainians lost significant number of vehicles, infantry fighting vehicles and tanks. So you know that Ukrainians used a lot of forces. Up to 2 battalions were involved in that offensive operation. As for now, the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation reported around 200 losses, exactly among those forces that were involved in this operation. So, but we see that's Ukraine stopped. So let's wait and see what is going to be next. Another important update is coming from the western direction. According to information we have, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to establish complete control over the fields to the west of Sverdlikova. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the north in Kupiansk direction. During the previous 24 hours, we got lots of very interesting updates and important updates from the Russian, let's say, foothold on the Ukrainian side of the river Voskol. I'll remind you that yesterday, the Ukrainian sources published this video, and in this video, we can see how the Ukrainians were bombing, were attacking Russian units, Russian soldiers, troops on the territory of this small village in the most northern part, which means that the village was, by the time Ukrainians were making this video, was under complete Russian control. Based on this video, most of the mappers have adjusted their maps in Russian favor. For example, this is the situation by the end of the 5th of February. As you can see, the edge Russian positions were going along the settlement of Novomlinsk. And by the end of the 6th of February, the Russians managed to take the entire Figulivka, the village, under complete control. And today, by the end of the 7th of February, according to different sources, the Russians managed to improve their positions significantly. For example, neutral mappers reported that the Russians managed to restore control over the main supply road that currently goes between the settlement of Figulivka, the settlement of Dvorechna, and then in the direction of Granikovka, that is located already on the Russian side of the river. Furthermore, different pro-Russian resources reported that during the previous 24 hours, the armed forces of Russian Federation managed to improve their position significantly in the western direction. So if we summarize everything that was published by pro-Russian resources, currently the Russians control everything that is already located inside of this red line. And obviously, as for now, this is the biggest foothold ever created by the Russians on the Ukrainian side of the river Voskol. And now when we zoom a bit out, we're gonna see a very interesting picture. For example, as you can see, Russian offensive in this area is being developed in 3 directions. And every single direction connected with some road. For example, we can see some salient in the direction of Zaporizhzhia along R79 road. So, which means that the weather dictates the way how the Russians can attack, and most likely the Russians are going to move further along this road with the purpose to attack the city of Kupiansk. In the central part of Dvorichna and the central part of this foothold, there are two more roads that goes first one in the direction of Kutkovka, and the second road is going in the direction of Dovginke and then further in the direction of Ritkadub. So most likely the Russians are going to attack along these two roads as well. And during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions along another road that goes in the direction of Petroivanovka and Novovasilievka. And I believe that this road, the final one, is going to be a primary target for the Russians, because if the Russians are able to improve their positions further in the northern direction, then the settlement of Kamenka would be caught from the mainland, and Ukrainians there would be caught in cauldron without any possibilities for evacuation through these fields during this weather. Furthermore, I'll remind you that the Russians during the previous week crossed the river Voskol and encircled the settlement of Topoli from the southwest. So very interesting situation. We see that the Russians' offensive operation intensifying, and basically this offensive operation is gaining momentum. And most likely, Ukrainians are not even going to stop the Russians in this direction, because basically they don't have forces to do this. So let's wait and see what is going to be next. But obviously, during the negotiation process, most of the updates are going to come from this area as well. As for the territories between the central Kupiansk direction and the city of Chasiv, during the previous 24 hours we haven't received anything special. Just regular activities from the Russian side and the Ukrainian side, lots of artillery strikes, lots of different reports that the Russians are advancing, that the Russians are taking more and more territories under complete control, that Ukrainians retreating, and many other things, similar things. The most important updates from this area are coming from the city of Toretsk. This morning, when the Russians made their, let's say, regular report about the casualties, about the losses of the armed forces of Ukraine, about the clashes along different front lines, the Russians reported that as a result of clashes, the group of forces center managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Druzhba. Based on this report of the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, we have adjusted the map in this area, and we have colored the contested area into the area of complete Russian control. So this is the first change that we got during the day. And a few hours ago, the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation in their Telegram channel made a special post regarding the situation in the city of Toretsk. And the Russians reported that as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to establish complete control over the city of Toretsk. So the battle for this stronghold finished today on the 7th of February of 2025. The Russians managed to secure the settlement completely to force the Ukrainians to fall back. And the most important, based on this report, we have adjusted the map in Russian favor. We have colored the most northern part by coloring this mine and the industrial zone in Russian favor, and this one as well. I'll remind you that according to different geolocations that we've been receiving since the beginning of January, most likely the Russians managed to take the city of Toretsk a long time ago. But I'll remind you that Ukrainians probably 2 weeks ago began, carried out several counterattacks, which allowed them to restore control over some northern parts and streets. And that's allowed the Ukrainians to win some time, because the Russians didn't announce about the victory in the battle for the city of Toretsk until they finished the clearing operation. And most likely today, on the 7th of February, this operation was finished. And you know, this is very important because it's like a multiple effect. Ukrainians were defeated most likely in the Sudzha direction, and today the Ukrainians lost also the city of Toretsk. Of course, when talking about the Ukrainian side, they published their own article when talking about Deep State, and Deep State reported that information about the Russia's occupation of Toretsk is not true. Urban battles continue, and the defense forces continue to resist the armed forces of Russian Federation. So as for now, we have different articles. As you can see, the Russians are saying about the ending of the battle, the Ukrainians are saying that there are still clashes. So let's wait and see what is going to be next. As for me, I'm waiting for videos with flags or something like this. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk direction. During the previous 24 hours, nothing special happens in the southwestern part of the city, just the video published by the Ukrainian side. And in this video we can see how the Ukrainians were attacking the positions of the armed forces of Russian Federation on the territory of the central mine. So based on this video, we haven't adjusted anything, we just only video. I'll remind you that several days ago the Ukrainians counterattacked in this area, and maybe maybe even managed to answer the mine, but most likely later they were forced to fall back. So we see that maybe this geolocation confirmed that Ukrainians still have plans to counterattack, to continue counterattacks in this area. Very interesting video is coming from the settlement of Uspienovka. Today, the Ukrainian sources published a video how they were bombing the Russians on the territory of the settlement in the most central part. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map, and now we can say that the Russians control around 55% of the settlement and the Ukrainians control just 45%. Now let's move further. Let's discuss the situation in the Andreevka fortified area direction. The most important updates are coming from the settlement of Andreevka itself. The Russians during the previous 24 hours managed to improve their positions, to take several buildings, and to improve their forces, to improve their foothold in the central part of the settlement. Basically, we believe that if this information, of course, is correct, most likely the Russians during the next several days will be able to take everything under control inside of this red line, and to shorten the distance to the northern outskirts of the settlement of Ulakli, and the most important, to the positions of the armed force of Russian Federation to the south of Constantinople Ulakli road. So they will be able to shorten the distance and to create a cauldron. Now let's discuss the situation in the Zaporizhzhia direction, because very interesting details are coming from this area as well. You know that during the previous weeks, months, there were lots of articles regarding the future of the special military operation, and the sources were saying that Ukrainians will try to counterattack, to maneuver, to force the Russians to, to surrender or to sign agreement in based on Ukrainian favorable, let's say, positions or something like this. But we see that nothing helps Zelensky to let's say, to force the Russians to play according to his understanding of the situation. So there were lots of articles that if Ukraine lose, if Ukraine understand that they're going to lose, and that most likely the peace and the peace agreement will sign in Russian favor, they will attack, they will collect, they will gather everything they have, they will collect every single soldier's forces they have, and they will attack in the direction of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. And now we see that Ukrainians began something like reconnaissance in combat, trying to understand what exactly is happening here. So I believe that maybe during the next months, Ukrainians will try to attack the city of Energodar with the purpose to take under complete control Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Because if the information about truce and about ceasefire that the US wants to force Russia and Ukraine to sign by the 20th of April is true, then Ukrainians have just 2 months, February, March, and a part of April, to take under control nuclear power plant. Because if Ukrainians are able to do this by this date, most likely nuclear power plant will stay under Ukraine control after the peace agreement. And if not, Russia will save control over this territory, probably for ages or something like this. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes to my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.